She walked in quietly, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished marble floor. Dressed in a plain cardigan and a second-hand dress, she looked completely out of place in the grand estate where the will reading was about to take place. The others barely acknowledged her. Some whispered, some smirked. To them, she was just the help, someone the late Mr. Harrington had taken pity on. They never expected her to be in the room, let alone seated at the table with them. But she had been invited for a reason. The room was filled with polished shoes, expensive watches, and forced smiles. Family members and distant relatives who hadn't spoken to Mr. Harrington in years. Everyone was here for one thing, the inheritance. They talked over her, rolled their eyes, even laughed when her name was mentioned. One of them leaned over and muttered, "Must be a mistake." Another said, "She's just the maid." She didn't argue. She didn't even flinch. The lawyer opened the folder, cleared his throat, and began to read the will. At first, it was exactly what everyone expected: property, stocks, and family heirlooms. Names were called, amounts were mentioned. Smiles grew. But then the tone shifted. The lawyer paused. Everyone leaned in. And that's when everything changed. The final name on the list wasn't one of the relatives. It wasn't a business partner. It wasn't even someone the family had talked about during the small talk before the reading. It was hers. Suddenly, the room fell silent. The smirks disappeared. Every eye turned toward the simple woman who had sat quietly in the corner, ignored and underestimated. But what exactly did she inherit, and why? Stick around, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Her name was Maria. She had worked for Mr. Harrington for nearly 15 years, cooking his meals, tending to the garden, keeping the house in order. But more than that, she had listened to him, shared quiet moments, and cared for him in ways no one else had. While his relatives sent holiday cards and showed up only when money was involved, Maria was there every single day. Still, to the family, she was invisible. Now, with one sentence from the lawyer, everything shifted. The remainder of Mr. Harrington's estate, his mansion, businesses, and assets, shall go to Maria Alvarez. Gasps echoed around the room. One cousin dropped their glass. A niece looked like she might faint. The disbelief was written all over their faces. No one knew how to react. How could a woman with no last name anyone had bothered to learn suddenly become the heir to a fortune? Maria stayed quiet. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She knew they were all watching her, trying to figure it out. Why her? What had she done to deserve all of this? What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask, was the real story behind Maria's connection to Mr. Harrington. There were layers they had never seen, secrets no one had ever suspected. While they were busy chasing wealth, Maria had built something different with him: trust, respect, and a bond deeper than money. But the family wasn't ready to accept this outcome. Not yet. Whispers turned into arguments. Some questioned the will's validity. Others threatened legal action. And Maria? She just sat there, silent, knowing this was only the beginning. Because the truth behind the inheritance was far more shocking than anyone in that room could imagine. The room quickly turned hostile. Murmurs gave way to raised voices. One of Mr. Harrington's nephews, Daniel, stood up and slammed his hand on the table. This has to be a joke. He wouldn't leave everything to her. His sister, Lauren, shot Maria a glare. She must have manipulated him, probably took advantage while he was sick. Maria didn't react. Not because she wasn't hurt by the words, she was, but because she had expected them. She knew the family never saw her as anything more than the housekeeper. But she also knew the truth, and that gave her strength. Daniel, who had been counting on the inheritance to pay off his debts, immediately started making calls. A lawyer, a friend in the press. He wasn't going to let this go. Meanwhile, Lauren, who had always believed she'd take over the family's antique business, began digging into Maria's past. She was convinced there had to be something to expose, some secret that would undo the will. What none of them knew was that Mr. Harrington had updated the will just a few weeks before his passing, and he had done it with a clear mind. He even recorded a private video message, which hadn't been played yet. It was locked in a safe in his study, and only one person had the code, Maria. Outside the mansion, reporters started gathering. Word was already spreading. The story of a humble housekeeper inheriting a millionaire's estate was too juicy to ignore. Some called it heartwarming. Others called it scandalous. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Suspicion filled every corner. Maria was no longer just the help. She was the woman standing in the way of everything they thought they deserved. And the real reason behind it all was still waiting to be revealed. The storm outside seemed to echo the tension inside the mansion. Thunder rumbled as the lawyer announced that Mr. Harrington had left behind one final message, a video recording to be played only after the will had been read. Everyone froze. I started to Maria, who quietly nodded and reached into her purse. She pulled out a small piece of paper with a 6-digit code. The lawyer guided her to the safe behind a bookshelf in Mr. Harrington's study. The room followed in silence, heavy with anticipation and doubt. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his jaw tight. Lauren stood by the window, scrolling through her phone, likely preparing a statement in case things didn't go their way. Others whispered theories. Some claimed Maria was his secret daughter. Others insisted she had somehow tricked him. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she entered the code. The safe clicked open, revealing a small flash drive and a sealed letter. She handed them both to the lawyer, who inserted the drive into the television on the far wall. The screen lit up with the familiar face of Mr. Harrington. He looked tired but clear-eyed. Calm. The room was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the windows. "If you're watching this," he began, "then my time has passed, and the truth can finally be told." He paused, his eyes steady on the camera. "Some of you may be surprised by the decisions I've made, but everything I've done has a reason. Reasons many of you may not understand yet. This isn't just about money." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Lauren's face tightened. Mr. Harrington leaned forward slightly. "Before I explain everything, I need to tell you about the night that changed everything. The night Maria saved my life." And then the screen faded to black. The screen remained black for a moment longer than anyone expected. A quiet tension filled the room, thick and uneasy. Then Mr. Harrington's voice returned, softer this time. The video showed a dimly lit hallway, a recording from the security cameras in the house, dated 3 years ago. A younger, frailer version of him appeared on screen, stumbling, clutching his chest. He had suffered a heart episode late one night, completely alone in the mansion, except for Maria. The footage played on. Maria appeared, rushing into frame. She didn't hesitate. She called emergency services, gave him CPR, stayed with him the whole time. Her actions, calm and fast, saved his life. The room watched in stunned silence. No one had ever heard about this. Mr. Harrington's voice returned in the video. "That night, Maria didn't just save me. She stayed with me through the entire recovery. When I couldn't walk, she pushed the wheelchair. When I wanted to give up, she made me laugh. Not once did she ask for anything in return. I began to realize that the people I had built my fortune for weren't the ones who stood by me when it mattered most." Daniel's face turned red. Lauren looked away, her jaw clenched. It was clear the video was more than a tribute, it was a warning. Mr. Harrington had chosen Maria not out of guilt or sentiment, but from a deep sense of gratitude and trust. The lawyer paused the video just as Mr. Harrington was about to reveal what happened after his recovery. Everyone leaned forward, the room heavy with unspoken questions. Outside, the storm grew louder. Inside, the silence was deafening. Because the next words on that video were going to change everything they thought they knew about Maria and themselves. The video resumed. Mr. Harrington appeared again, his eyes filled with something deeper than emotion, conviction. After that night, he said, I started paying closer attention. I watched how Maria treated people with kindness, even those who treated her poorly. I saw how my own family, sadly, only came around when they wanted something. I began to question everything, who I was leaving my legacy to, and why. He took a breath. That's why I made the decision to leave everything to Maria. Not out of pity, but because she earned it. She gave me more than money ever could, dignity, peace, and loyalty. And for anyone questioning her place in my life, he reached beside him, held up an envelope, and smiled faintly. Maria is not just my housekeeper. Years ago, long before most of you met her, she was my late wife's niece. She was family long before any of you cared to ask. Gasps filled the room. Lauren looked stunned. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. The lawyer turned to Maria, handing her a copy of the letter from the video. Everything is in legal order, he said. You are the sole heir. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Maria, tears in her eyes, nodded slowly. But just as the tension began to settle, the lawyer added something else. There's one final instruction, he said. Mr. Harrington left a second letter, addressed not to Maria, but to whoever challenges the will. He placed it on the table. No one reached for it. Because in that moment, they knew he had expected this. He had seen through them all. And whatever was inside that final letter was meant to remind them that some things, once lost, can never be bought back. The room sat in uneasy silence, eyes fixed on the unopened envelope lying on the table. No one dared to touch it. In their hearts, they already knew what it would say. Regret hung in the air like the fading storm outside, thick, heavy, and quiet. One by one, the relatives began to leave. Some avoided Maria's gaze. Others offered half-hearted nods, too proud or too ashamed to say more. Daniel hesitated near the door, looking like he wanted to speak, but turned away. Lauren paused, looked at Maria, then simply said, I didn't know. I'm sorry, and that was enough. Maria stayed behind with the lawyer after the room cleared. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel like a winner. What she felt was peace, something she hadn't known in a long time. She opened the last envelope herself, not out of fear, but to understand. Inside was a single line in Mr. Harrington's handwriting. Asterisk let them learn that legacy isn't about money. It's about character. Asterisk. Weeks later, the mansion was quiet again, but this time with warmth instead of tension. Maria chose not to keep everything. She sold some assets, donated to charities Mr. Harrington had supported, and turned the estate into a community center, one that offered shelter, food, and education for people who needed a second chance, just like she once had. The media moved on, the gossip faded, but the story remained. A simple woman who was once overlooked had taught everyone what true wealth really meant. And in the end, it wasn't the money, the mansion, or the inheritance that mattered. It was the reminder that kindness, loyalty, and quiet strength are the most valuable things a person can leave behind.